To order. Welcome to the November 6th, 2024 PUSD Governing Board meeting. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, moving on to item 4, approval of the agenda. Item 4A, consider approving the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move that we approve the agenda as presented.
I have a motion. Do you guys do I have a second? Motion is seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to item 5, approval of the minutes. Item 5A, consider approving the minutes from the regular study and voting session meeting of October 15th, 2024. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion is seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Item 6, presentations. Item 6A, International Travel Program Update. Ms. Catherine Hammer, Badgers Abroad Advisor.
Hello. Hello.
Do it all.
All right, awesome. This is my clicker. Can I do a practice? Crushed it. Okay. Is this okay? I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me tonight. So, as Mr. Gologowski said, I am Kat Hammer. I teach biology at Prescott High School, as well as advising our chapter of the National Honor Society. And I also am the advisor for our international travel program, which we have now dubbed Badgers Abroad, because any good travel program needs a good name. So that is the name we picked. Okay, and that's our very cute logo that was designed by a student. So she did that art for me, which was really great. Okay, so I just wanted to start off this review with a little bit of a timeline of our program. I know not everyone has been observing the start to finish of that. So we started off planning our first trip for really the revival of this program. We had an international travel program at Prescott High School when I was a student there, so that was originally run by Shelley Bunch in the 2012 to 2013 region. She originally ran that, and then in 2021, Jeff Wood over at Prescott High School, when he was an English teacher, actually tried to restart that and got our first trip going. So that was to London, Paris, Florence, and Rome in 2021. He actually changed positions before that trip started, so he handed that off to Mandy Atherton, who was a math teacher at the time. And then when her position changed, she handed it off to me. So our first trip here in spring break of 2022, I traveled on, but actually as a chaperone. So that was a really great experience for me as the now advisor of the program to get to see it from just the chaperone level. So on that trip, we had a total of 31 travelers, so that was a great start to our first trip. And then next up in April of 2022, we had the launch for our Japan trip, and this was a huge trip for us. We had nearly 400 responses to the launch of that trip. I had to move the meeting to Rue Street Theater to accommodate all the people who were going to come. And then it was our largest trip, so we had over 60 travelers on that trip, including students and chaperones, and then also adult travelers as well. It was actually a 2-bus tour, so we had 2 buses for our group because we had so many people. So that was really great. And all the photos here are all from our trips. So these were all photos of Japan. The one in the middle here with the super cool life-size Gundam is our whole group. So that's like all 60 people. So that was really great. And that was the first trip that I led, was that spring break 2023 trip. After that, this past year, spring break of 2024, we had our trip to Scotland and Ireland. That one was also a really great trip. Those pictures are on the right-hand side there. That's St. Patrick's Cathedral, and then some of the Highlands of Scotland as well with the group. And then this year we also did our first summer trip, which was to Peru. That was one of our smallest trips. We had about 6 students traveling, which was a really cool experience to have such a small group. And that first picture there is us hiking up Machu Picchu and then visiting an alpaca farm, which was very fun for the students. So that's just kind of a look at where we've been so far. And then upcoming, as you guys know, because I think everyone in this room has voted on these upcoming trips, this is where we're headed next. So in 2025, our spring break trip is to Rome and Athens. And then in 2025, we do have another summer trip to the Galapagos Islands. And then next year, which this one we just approved the last meeting, thank you. And we'll be launching soon. We don't have signups for that yet, but that one is going to Spain. It should be really great. Okay, so that's where we're headed next. And then again, just to look back at some numbers here. So in total, over the last 3 years, we've had 113 students travel with us abroad. They've traveled over 40,000 miles in total to 18 cities across 6 countries. Because we do take adult travelers as well on our trips, we've had 16 adult community members who have traveled with us as well, 10 teacher chaperones who have traveled, and so that's a total of 139 Prescottonians who have traveled abroad over the 3 years of this program, which is a number that I'm very proud of. And then last, I wanted to give you guys a look at what our community thinks about this program and people who have traveled. So I reached out to our folks who have traveled with us, both the families of students and then also the students themselves who traveled. And so this is some of the feedback. One that I really wanted to highlight was down here in the corner from John Hansen. So his daughter Margaret traveled with us to Japan, and he wrote, "Margaret took hundreds of pictures, told as many stories, and seemed to have matured greatly between leaving and returning from the trip. Since graduating PHS, she has been studying simulation sciences, gaming, animation, and graphic design at Embry-Riddle. She is planning a junior year summer 1-month study abroad program with Embry-Riddle and Osaka University, and her degree path is opening some opportunities to potentially further her studies in Japan or potentially work there." So that was such a bolster to my heart as a teacher and as a person who really believes in this travel program, to hear that, like, that's the dream, is that everyone finds their path and their passion from these experiences. So I was so excited to hear that from that family. And then a couple of other, again, great feedback from folks, which I know there's a lot to read, so I'm happy to share any of this after the fact if anyone wanted to read more of that. And then most importantly, our students. So as we know, everything we do here is for our students, so I thought we should wrap up with their feedback from this. So we do have some students who have now graduated who have traveled with us. So several of them are college freshmen. We have some college sophomores who traveled with us. And so seeing their reflections back on that was really excellent as well. I'll give you a second to peruse some before I go next. And then a few more on the next page. Oh, and this one down here in the corner, this was actually a very cool, unique example of one of our student travelers. She actually traveled on all 3 of the trips that we have done during spring break with us, and each time a different member of her family went with her, so her dad and then her mom and then her sister. So that was a really fun kind of thing to see her kind of grow throughout all those different travel experiences and with her different family members as well. So that is my last slide, and then I think that leaves me open to questions, if anyone has any.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple. So you had one group in Machu Picchu with 6 students, you said?
Yeah.
And then you had a group with like 40 or 60.
60.
60 in Japan. So do you, 2-part question, do you purposely try to make the sizes for each trip small versus large? And what do you prefer? Do you prefer a smaller group or a larger group?
I do not do that purposefully. It's really about who is interested and then who has the time. What I have noticed trend-wise is that our community seems to gravitate more towards those spring break trips. They have tended to be larger overall, and then our summer trips are smaller.
Okay.
So it seems a little bit more time-related for the community.
Okay.
And then that's really hard to say which one I like better.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're both really interesting. It's, you know, when you have more students, you have a bigger chaperone group, and so then you have a lot more adults, and that dynamic is very different, which is really great to see all the different adults interacting with students, and how we all kind of work together as a team. When it's a smaller group, because we get one chaperone for every 6 paying participants, so on the Peru trip, I was the only chaperone, so then it's a little more, obviously you have a kind of one-on-one experience with those kids that you're with, so that's also really fun.
A quick question, how do you go about deciding the locations you're going to?
Yeah, so so far our first 2 trips were really kind of just interest of the group leader at the time, so where they thought would be popular for students, but then also was a spot that they were potentially interested in going. And then I have kind of followed that as well. My goal in picking sites is to kind of mix up our locations from year to year, just so that there's something that kind of fits everyone. So we went to Japan in 2023, and so now we've done a couple of trips around Europe, and so then at some point we'll probably want to go back to Japan or somewhere else in that region. So we kind of have South America, we have Europe, we have Asia, just so that there's a little bit for everyone. Because as you could see from some of the student comments, like students come into this situation with different interests. So there may be an area that's of particular interest to a student. Scotland and Ireland, I think, was really interesting to a lot of people in our community because they have family history there. And so that was one that we saw more interest in that because of that reason. So yeah, kind of interest-based, and then what hopefully is exciting for students.
Kat, what do you do to pay for this? How do you fundraise or what?
So currently the biggest thing that we do to kind of make the cost more manageable for more families is to plan well in advance. So that gives everyone a longer amount of time to divide up monthly payments, so then those monthly payments end up smaller. Currently, with our timeline of about 12 to like 14 months before the trip actually goes, our monthly payments end up being around $200 for each family. We're working on some other ways to potentially increase that. I've been working with Brian more on getting our tax credit set up so that we can take tax credit as well for these trips. So that's almost fully finalized. So that will be another way that we can help defray that cost for more students. The other thing that's actually really a great thing that our partner EF does is they make these fundraising pages that students get automatically as they sign up for the tour. And so that's something that they can share with friends or other family members who are maybe further away, and they can donate directly to that program cost for the student. So that's a way that a student can kind of do some fundraising on their own. Long term for this program, I would love to see maybe some scholarships that we could have as well, and then potentially any other kind of fundraising stuff that we could leverage, because really my goal is to have this as accessible to every student in our school as possible. When I was a student at Prescott High School, I actually didn't go on this trip because it wasn't a possibility for my family. So I'm very aware that that is a big issue for a lot of our students, and so that's definitely something that I'm very passionate about, making sure that that's accessible.
I love the idea, and I'm glad that you do it. I had some reservations, you know, because of all the world unrest we were having, but after we heard about the travel agency, is that it, that schedules that, it set my mind at ease. I'm interested to have the board know when you get that tax credit information, and
Absolutely.
if you need, you know, like the Rotary or the Kiwanis, we can kind of, you know, help with those kinds of things too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, and that was really great as well. I actually, the trip that we took to Peru, there was we were combined with another group because we were so small, and the folks from the other group that we were with, they had actually had their trip rescheduled because there was some political issues in Peru at the time that they were supposed to travel, and so EF said to them, like, you know, it's not safe right now, so we're gonna send you at a later date. And so that was actually really encouraging to me to also get to interact with some folks who actually had experienced like EF safety concerns and their like really promise of safety for all of us who travel. So that was really great to get that hands-on experience with that.
Good for you.
Thank you.
So we approved a trip in 2026. Does that mean that you have some eighth graders that you dip down and you talk to them, or is that a potential?
So occasionally we will send the information down to eighth grade. I think our email system has changed, so I don't know that I can actually do that anymore.
Yeah.
I have had students who have in the past signed up in their eighth grade year and then they travel as a freshman. But usually what we do is we'll send the information out to the full like PHS cohort at the time, so freshmen through seniors, and their folks will get those emails. And then they're able to sign up. So we have some students who travel with us like right after they've graduated or in their freshman year potentially. So yeah, we've had kind of run the gamut of students traveling with us. So
That's cool.
yeah,
Great.
thank you.
All right, any more questions? All right, thank you, Kat, appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to item 6B, A through F, score or school letter grades. Kelsey.
Good evening. So tonight I'm going to do my very best to explain a very complicated system to you. There's a lot of information, so we'll go through. Please don't hesitate to ask questions along the way. So as you know, we have our letter grades from 2023, and we have our letter grades from 2024. Last year they were the best letter grades that we have seen since this system was put into place. You will see that this year we had some scores that went up and we had some that went down. So my goal tonight is to give you a little bit of explanation as to why that was the case. So there are 3 different models that the department uses in order to create the A to F system. So we have the K-8 model. And this is for all of our elementary schools, for Granite and for Mile High. They're all in this system. So you'll notice that for the letter grade, 50% of this letter grade for K-8 is composed from growth. And I'll explain that a little bit more here in just a minute. And then proficiency, those are both on the AASA assessment that students take in April. Then we have acceleration or readiness, which is a variety of factors, and I'll explain that to you a little bit more in detail. And then 10% is based on the performance of our English language learners. So within that system, this is the data that we collect or that we get for each one of our schools. So you can see up here at the very top, you have the proficiency scores. And what I'd like you to notice when we're looking from Abaya-Judd to Mile High, especially for our K-4 schools, they're really close in percent that we have for those different pieces. So the thing that's interesting is Abaya-Judd's proficiency was a little bit higher than Lincoln, but you'll see there's a big difference in their letter grades, and that's due to some of these other factors. And we'll go through each of these ones in detail. What I do want you to notice here that does, seems a little bit different is there's some blank spots here, and that's under our EL proficiency and growth component. Those, you have to have 10 or more students in those categories in order to get points. So these 3 schools did not have 10 or more students in that category in order to get the points. So instead of their final score calculated out of 100, they're actually calculated out of 90. So it doesn't hurt us. However, when we get those full EL points, it does really help that overall score.
Kelsey, can I ask a clarifying question? I'm looking across the, excuse me, the top row, and I'm seeing for Taylor Hicks, for instance, 23.48 for proficiency.
Correct.
Is that suggesting that only 23.5% of our kids at Taylor Hicks are proficient?
No. No, what that means is that we got 23 percentage points out of a possible 30 for that.
23
Great
points
question.
out of 30.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, so you can see that the points correlate to the percentages in all of these categories. And then down here you see the point sum, the points eligible, and that's why they're a little bit different. And then the percentage is what calculates that final cut score after they tack on bonus points. The nice part about bonus points is those are added on after the percentage is figured out. So they're actually a little bit heavier in weight than they were if they were to be added before that percentage was calculated.
So you might be going to answer this question later, but Lincoln has 50% in growth, and that's the most they could have gotten.
So yes,
So
they
you-
got
are
the
you gonna-
full 50 points for growth.
So are you going to explain that a bit more later?
Yes,
Just curious.
that's actually something that's incredibly exciting.
high.
I've never seen somebody get that as long as we've been doing this system. So yes, the fact that they got 50 points, the full points was pretty impressive. They maximized that.
Kelsey, can I ask a question back to the, I think, the previous slide? Would you mind going back on it?
This one?
One more, sorry. You mentioned that our A as a district last year was relatively uncommon. We looked back historically, I'm not sure if you've got this here, but I've shared this with the board already. We looked back historically. The set of letter grades that PUSD got last year was the highest any district in Yavapai County with the like number of schools or more
Correct.
has ever received. So that was the high point for anybody in our region ever. And so the fact that we don't compare quite as favorably to last year is in some ways discouraging, but in some ways kind of a matter of course, particularly given that you need to grow for your grade to get better. You just showed us, go forward two more for me, yeah. I appreciate how you pointed out all three elementary schools are really pretty close to each other. And the one school that had higher proficiency actually had a substantially lower grade.
Correct.
So I think there's a misperception in the community that a lower grade means that we're not doing well on tests, or it's a bad school overall, or something like that. And
Not the case.
we're seeing data that shows that that's not the case at all, yes?
Correct. Yeah, and we'll look at some comparison in a few slides, but your proficiency, or what we get is percent passing, that doesn't correlate to letter grades because there's so many other components. And especially for the K-8 model, proficiency is only worth 30% of that overall grade. They're more focused on that growth component. And we'll talk about why that's a challenge here in a minute, but you know, we're pretty proud of where we've come for as far as proficiency. We know we're outperforming our peers in a lot of ways. Now we're working on how do we maximize the points in all of these other categories in order to maintain those really high letter grades.
In addition to wanting to get even better at proficiency, but
Correct.
and we certainly haven't maxed out there, but I
No.
think you're going to show us in a minute. Is it fair to say that the higher you get in proficiency, the more difficult it is to grow?
Yes.
And so that 50% piece gets really hard to attain if you're a fairly high performing school.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
And that's where you've seen kind of that bounce in some of our letter grades. If we were to go back one more year on that slide, you would see that our letter grades weren't quite as good, and then we had the best that we've ever had, and now we're back to not as great as we were last year. Still one of our top years, actually, not in a few places, but overall, when you look at our overall letter grade for the district, it's in the top 2, top 3, I think, out of the ones we've
I
ever
think it's the
had.
third best we've ever done as a district. Yeah.
So next I'm going to break down what each of these components mean and how those points are built. So the first piece is that proficiency score. Again, this is worth 30% of an overall grade. What you'll see here is you have number tested. For proficiency, they count partially proficient, proficient, and highly proficient. So the State Board of Education really recognizes that these partially proficient kiddos have a lot of skills. They're not quite there yet, but they're not far off. They're very close to grade level. What's different is if you're very mathematical, you're going to count these up and go, those don't match that average proficiency at the end. And there's a reason for that. That is because these have different multipliers. So partially proficient kiddos are worth 0.6 of a point in your final calculation. Proficient students are worth 1.0, and then your highly proficient students are worth 1.3. So you get kind of bonus points for getting into that highly proficient. So they're weighting the level of proficiency based on the category.
So if I'm doing the math correctly, in terms of points, we get our biggest boost taking a kid from minimally proficient to partially.
We do.
Our second biggest boost going from partially to proficient, fully proficient, I should say. Our third biggest boost going from fully proficient to highly proficient. proficient.
Correct.
So there's less impetus to move our high kids along. In terms of the points in the grade system,
Yeah.
we want to move every kid
Correct.
as far along as we can. And we don't think in terms of what will our letter grade be as we go about our day-to-day
Correct.
work. But there's a real emphasis on bringing the lowies up to.
Yeah, and that was very intentional in their scoring, was to give that biggest bump to get from minimally proficient to partially proficient, and then so on and so forth. So this is what our proficiency looked like for 3rd through 8th grade for ELA. And next we have 3rd through 8th grade in math. So same idea. What's interesting, I'm going to go back and forth for just a second, is our ELA average proficiency is a little bit lower than our math proficiency, not by a whole lot, but math for the last 3 or 4 years has been a district-wide focus and a district-wide goal, so it's nice to see that those are balancing out a little bit.
Can you go back one slide? Back? Thanks. I'm just looking at, Lincoln got an A, correct?
Correct.
So they're highly proficient 10 in Lincoln grade, okay.
And that's not a
Or
percentage.
three,
Again,
right,
this
no,
is the
that's-
number of students
That's
out of
those
52. yes.
Those are,
This one?
right, well, the
So
number that we're
tested,
looking at.
that's not a percentage, that's a number of students.
Number of students.
Same in each
Right.
column, that's a number of students. not a
Yes,
percentage.
correct. And then that average proficiency is based on the multiplier for the number of
that's gonna
students
be
in that
one.
category. So for proficiency, they give you 2 options. One is that overall proficiency that we just looked at. The second option is stability proficiency, that they call it. And only our elementary schools are eligible for this because they look at 3 years worth of data, really. And it's not 3 years worth of assessment data, but they look at students who've been at your school site for 3 years. So this gets a little confusing because let's look at Abaya-Judd. These 3 years, students who've been at Abaya-Judd for 3 years or longer, this was their average proficiency. Students who'd been at Abaya for 2 years or 2 years have this average proficiency, and 1 year is this. So what you'll notice for Abaya-Judd in particular is the longer students are attending that school, the higher they're performing. So when they compare this data point to their overall proficiency, the state takes whichever one is higher, and that's what's calculated in our final letter grade. Now, that is a trend that's fairly consistent, but you'll notice that there can be a cohort. I think the second year at Lincoln one is a good example, where students who'd been there for 2 years actually performed a little better than the ones who'd been there for 3. And that just depends on the students we get in. We never know where they're coming from or where they've been, so it really depends on the cohort.
If we were to see that same trend year after year, that would be
Correct.
concerning.
Correct.
If we take a snapshot, it may have more to do with the cohort.
Correct.
It
The-
really is striking, sorry to interrupt, it
No,
really
you're
is
good.
striking, especially at Abaya-Judd, the longer kids are with us. That's a trend overall, isn't it? That's what you're pointing out.
Correct.
Longer kids are with us, the better they tend to do. If they just came in from Page or Nogales or Prescott Valley or Phoenix or something, some of them are doing well, but they get better and better longer with us.
Yep. And that's been a trend that we've seen for years, actually. It's been pretty consistent.
Have we looked at that with our standardized testing? Of course, we'd only have 3rd and 4th grade at the elementary schools, wouldn't we?
So with this,
This is our
No, I
standard
know, but I
system.
mean just that score.
We have,
So-
yeah.
sorry, Jane, this is based off of their AASA scores. The 3-year, 2-year, 1-year, that's just based on how long they've been enrolled. But it's all based off of their AASA assessment.
But you're right, these are the points.
Correct.
We
Right.
have looked at the
The
actual raw
percentage,
scores
yep.
that make up these points.
That's what I
and
was asking about,
Of course,
the
it
raw
reflects the
scores.
same
Gotcha.
trend.
So that is our proficiency score. The proficiency is actually the piece that we have the most control over. We're able to predict pretty well how students are going to do on proficiency on assessments because we're tracking that all throughout the year. Growth is a lot more complicated and a lot more complex. So I'm going to walk you through a scenario, and this is just made up, but just to give you an idea of how that growth score is calculated. So if you've got 9 students, in 2023, they took AASA, and this was their scaled score. These group of kiddos scored the exact same. Now, what they do is across the state, they take all of the kids who had that exact same score, and they put them in one group together. So now they're a group. The hard part is, as a district, We don't have access to any of their data. We were not able to see how those kiddos do the next year. The following year, those same 9 kiddos take the next grade assessment, so say it's 3rd to 4th grade, they get a new score. They perform higher or lower, the same. So what they do is they then take these scores and they sort them from lowest to highest. And so within that cohort, if you are in the bottom 33%, you're considered to have low growth against your peers who, again, had this same scaled score that prior year. If you're in the middle 33%, you're considered to have average growth. And if you're in the top 33%, you're considered to have high growth. Now, you get a multiplier based off of where they fall in this category. And that's how they determine growth. So again, we can't predict this. We don't even know where our kiddos fall other than that band of 33%. We don't know if they were close to the top of that or close to the bottom of that. They just give us either that 1, 2, or 3 as far as where they fall. So we can't predict it. We don't know where kids are going to fall. So all we do and focus on is, are students proficient? Are we moving those students from one category to the next? Are we moving them as far as we possibly can? And that's how we're addressing this growth component.
So as far as Lincoln goes, they've got the complete highest score they could get in growth. What's our assumption? That most of them were in the high growth?
So most of them were either in this high growth or this
possibly
average growth.
Okay.
And that's a great example. I'd have to go back. I don't have that data right in front of me.
That's
But
such a high score.
looking at, because that's based only off of 4th graders at Lincoln. They're the only ones who have growth
At all
in
of
our
our schools.
elementary
Because, of
schools.
course,
All
they
of our
were
schools,
only-
yeah.
Yeah. So
started
that
with
3rd
third
grade cohort,
This might have
if
been a dynamic.
they scored really low in 3rd grade,
then-
their growth potential is so much more when it comes to their 4th grade year. And that's where they were able to maximize. And that's where we're seeing that little bit of swing is you have a higher year, then a lower year, then a higher year, depending on that cohort. The challenge for our K-4 schools is that 50% of their letter grade is based off of this growth, and that's one cohort. So for Lincoln, their whole letter grade is primarily 60 kids or less. It's just that one grade level band.
And to show that kind of growth, your 3rd graders had to score relatively low when they took it and scored much better when they were in 4th
Possibly, yeah, at least in relation to other kids who had the same score the
Exactly.
previous year across the state, and we don't know who
Exactly.
those kids are. Yeah, so when you hear growth, you think 50% growth, okay, well, maybe there's room for that, but even the growth component is different than most people think. They
Yes.
think if a kid scored 1,000 points last year, they score 1,005 points this year, they showed growth, that might be totally the opposite. 1,000 points last year, 1,005 points this year might put them at the very top of their scoring cohort throughout the state, or it might put them at the very bottom, and we don't have any really way to know that.
Or predict it.
And
Yeah.
we as a district don't have much control over this.
None.
It's
at
kind
all.
of it's kind of a
Almost
funky
none.
system. Certainly, we do have control over
Yeah.
what we teach kids and
Correct.
how far we bring them and whatnot, and that's reflected in growth. So
Right.
I wouldn't want anybody to go away with the impression that we're saying, well, woe is me, we can't do anything about this. Not the case, but it's very hard to predict. It's very hard to predict,
Yeah.
and hard to understand even once it's done, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
this-
with proficiency, we know what that
Right,
target is.
proficiency
So,
is a
and we're
different thing,
tracking that target through our formative assessments. So we feel confident in one way or the other. We know where students are going to land. As far as how the rest of their cohort does, that's what we just don't have control over and we don't know. So we just move students as far as we possibly can within the time that we have them.
I'm sure you'll get to this, but does this mean that the students at Lincoln scored higher on their AASA than students in any other schools in our district?
No. And I'll take you back to, oh, sorry, this one has a lot. No. So if you look back at this data point, Lincoln actually had the lowest proficiency,
Okay.
but the highest growth. And because
Okay.
that growth is 50% of that grade,
Right.
it counts for more than just that proficiency score.
Okay. So it doesn't necessarily, so growth doesn't necessarily reflect performance on the
No.
assessment test. It just reflects from one year to the next.
Yes.
Compared to other kids in the
Compared
state.
Compared
that would
to-
be- Yeah, yeah.
In the state,
Yes.
how much they've improved.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
There's some real positive things about this. It gives us some good actionable data, but there's parts,
Correct.
it's
Yeah.
clearly confusing for most everybody and kind of funky. I've had a couple people in the community reach out to me. I used to be the principal at Judd, and we always were doing quite well, and we've done historically very well, A's, B's, A's, B's. It's the first time they've had a C. We've had a couple people say, oh my gosh, what happened? How come scores tanked? No, scores didn't tank. They're almost, proficiency, they're about where they were. They're actually better than one of our very own schools in terms of proficiency that had an A grade, and higher in proficiency than many other schools statewide that got A grades. So is this A through F system perfect? It's certainly not. Is it misleading? Certainly the people in our community who thought that AJ's scores had tanked were misled by the grade.
The positive I see from it is, look at what you've done. You've taken a group of kids that, compared to the state,
Right.
improved tremendously
Outperformed, yeah,
with the teaching they got in our district,
correct.
at this school in
Yep.
particular. So I think that's a real positive, regardless of whatever the raw scores are. You know, it's showing that these students are learning and growing
Correct.
through the teaching that they're receiving, is how I would view it.
And actually, I think that's why K-8 was set up in this manner, is because, yes,
Okay.
proficiency is important, but what we want to see more is that kids are continuing to move and
Okay.
progress. And so really honoring that as well.
Okay.
And that's super important.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's absolutely room for the argument that 50% of the score will be based
For
on
sure.
growth. There's room for different arguments too.
Correct. I think the biggest thing to take away, though, is that these proficiency numbers don't reflect that letter grade. There's so much more to this system than just looking at that proficiency and those scores that we see out sometimes in the public.
So if you, one more question, I hate to.
Yeah,
interrupt
go
you,
for it.
But if you have let's say a third grade cohort, they score extremely well.
Yep.
They move to fourth grade. How do you score a lot better than extremely well?
That's where we're
To
getting
show
some of
the
those
growth.
swings. Yeah.
Because it becomes very difficult if you already score high, to score higher the next year. There's
Yes.
a point where you almost can't.
You max out a little
You
bit.
max out a bit.
That's part, it's not the only one.
It's-
It's
right.
part of the dynamic
Right,
for
right.
AJ this year. No
Oh,
question.
is it? Okay.
Yeah, they were doing pretty well.
they
and it's
did really
harder to
well
do-
in
be
third
doing
grade?
even
Okay.
better.
Yeah, because proficiency, they were right in there with everybody else. They did pretty well. When it comes to growth, that was the area you can see they have some room within there. They missed some points in that category.
Does it have to do with, I'm not sure I want to say content, like Lincoln was practicing when, what I need. I don't know if Abaya Judd was, but I know
They were.
that the principals changed places. And Karen Hughes brought it over to Granite Mountain, right? So, and I'm trying to see if it was because of that their growth scores improved, that kind of thing.
For
Am I on
Lincoln?
the right track?
Yeah. Yes. So Lincoln has a very strong intervention program that they've refined throughout the years. Yes, Karen is trying to recreate that up at Granite. It looks a little different at a 5-6 level, but she's working on it.
Yeah.
Abaya Judd also has a really strong intervention program. Really, what this could be is just a cohort who didn't have as many high achievers in that group. Again, that growth is only your fourth graders. So it's based off of one group of students. And we know each cohort is entirely different. They're not always the exact same. So that could be part of it. It could have been gaps in instruction. There's a variety of things that it could have been, which is why that growth score is not where we want to see it.
Is there any way we can find that out? Because if it is one of these programs that's highly successful at one of these schools, then we've got that puzzle piece.
Yes, and they work together a lot. I think the thing, we'll talk about this when we get to action steps, that we've put into place that's going to look different than last year is we're tracking students in a different way than we ever have. We are tracking their proficiency on essential standards every single quarter. So we're looking at where do we intervene a lot quicker. And so that's either through intervention or that's through classroom interventions as well. Yeah, so we're kind of re-looking at all of them, using the best of what everybody has and making that happen across the board.
If your broader question includes, can we and should we be doing win time or a version of it at each of our schools, the answer is absolutely yes, and we absolutely are.
And we are.
But it's not reflected in all of these, you're right. But to suggest that that got Lincoln where they're at, again, Lincoln's proficiency scores are the lowest of the three areas. So there's a whole variety of factors that
Yeah,
help us
because
move
I know
along.
when Karen was telling us, that when she was at Lincoln, and she told the teachers, you will do this, I love you, I think she said, I love you, and you're
And
going
we're
to
doing
do
this.
this.
Yep, that's right,
And
that's
so,
Sounds right.
and then she left, and they traded places, and she took it up there. But I didn't know if Taylor Hicks is also doing that, or,
good
just
question.
where is this moving target?
Yes,
you
the
know?
answer,
Yeah.
Taylor Hicks is doing it,
Yes.
Wyajed's doing it, yeah. Looks slightly different each school, but there's a version of that at every school, and we're leaning into it even more heavily this year than we did the previous year.
Could it be something else, though? Could it be other than,
Sure, there's a variety
How
of factors.
could we find that out?
One thing we know from nationwide data, statewide data, and even our local data is that one of the most important I shouldn't say most important, one of the
Contributing.
one of the contributing factors that's the strongest contributor is the free and reduced lunch rate. How many kids at each school come from families that are well off, and how many kids come from families that economically are not as advantaged. There's a direct correlation between those in all states, in most schools. And that's of course beyond our control, but we intervene in as many ways as we can.
Yeah, I don't weight that as heavy, being underprivileged. I just.
Yeah, the data shows
see
otherwise,
that
but I can see your point of view.
So the next category that counts towards our final letter grade is the EL proficiency and growth. This is not based off of the AASA assessment. Instead, this is based off of the Azella assessment, which assesses for English proficiency. And again, it's worth 10% if you have 10 or more students within that category. And so not all of our students qualified not all of our students, all of our schools qualified this year. Actually, we've seen our EL population increase. We had a pretty big influx this year. And so every school except for one qualifies for points for this upcoming year for our EL category. And so they're looking at proficiency and growth on the Azella assessment for our students. And what I will tell you is that our students have performed really well over the last couple years in EL. And that is because we've invested in staff who've been working with those students and really working on intentional instruction to build those literacy skills.
Yeah, Kelsey, great point. A couple of years ago, this was an area of weakness for us. The schools that did have enough kids to score did not score well. We were getting 0 points or 2 points out of 10. And so we said, well, there's an area that we can invest some more in to impact our letter grade, and we have, and it's paid off.
Mm-hmm. It has.
Certainly for those kids, but also for public perception. People, for some reason, care a lot about what single letter was handed out to a school to sum up everything they do.
Mm-hmm. The next category, which is an additional 10%, is called acceleration and readiness. And this is only applicable for our K-8 schools. So what you can see here are the different categories, and not all of our schools qualify for all of these points. So you have third grade minimally proficient. They want to see that category decrease from year to year. And so if you do, you get points for that. Obviously, that's only applicable for our K-4 schools. The next category, again, because of the trend that we're seeing statewide in 8th grade math data, if you increase your percentage of highly proficient students in 8th grade math from year to year, you get points for that. If you decrease your percentage of minimally proficient from year to year in 8th grade math, you get points there. So these are built in to try and help promote and improve those areas that statewide they're seeing some concerns with test scores. Next is chronic absenteeism. So in the state of Arizona, you're considered chronically absent if you've missed 10 or more, or 10% or more of the school year, which is about 18 days for students. Yeah. Schools are working really hard to decrease this number, and we're seeing that decrease. If you decrease your percent at all from year to year, you get your points in this category. So schools are tracking attendance and really working with families to make sure that kids are coming to school.
What do we do, Kelsey, to, because in Arizona, the chronic absenteeism rate is about 39%. I think in Prescott, it's 27, 29%.
Yeah, don't
They
have that
had a
average.
presentation at the last
Okay.
ASBA conference
On
that
that?
I attended, and it was really a comprehensive breakout session. And so what are we doing?
Great question.
What steps?
So our schools are tracking attendance at certain data points. So when they get to about 5 days of absenteeism, when they get to 8 days, when they get to 12 days, they're contacting families, they're setting up team meetings to go, okay, what's the barrier from getting you at school? How can we help? What has been really effective in the last couple years is juvenile probation has partnered with us. Again, there was a long time that they did not, but they are helping with truancy. And so that is kind of a last resort if schools have worked with families and they're still not getting students to show up. They are sometimes referring to juvenile justice, which gets them involved. And again, it's more of an intervention. It's not a punishment, but it's how can we as a community come together to help you to get students to school.
I think we need to be stronger about
Yeah.
it and not so weak. There has to be consequences. If they don't come to school, we can't teach them.
And that's totally right. And that's up to juvenile probation at that point if they decide to issue those consequences. We're working with them. We're trying real hard to just be that place where they want to come to school. And so working with the team, the student, the family, whatever it takes to try and get them to school as much as we possibly can. It's a pretty time-intensive effort, but our staff and our
worth it.
administration know it's worth it. Yeah, so they're putting that time in.
And if I can, I just looked up really quick from the Department of Education. The chronic absenteeism rate statewide was 28%, so it's fairly high.
Okay,
It's not
28.
nearly as high as was just shared, but it is fairly high, and that's more than double than before COVID across the state. Families just kind of got in the mode of
Right.
maybe it's not important to go to school, and that's absolutely not the case. Yeah, you're right. It's a delicate balance between, if we say, hey, you didn't come to school, we don't want to be so weak, we're going to punish you. Well, what does that do? How does that help things? And so it's always a delicate balance for how do we support the families getting kids to school and instead of being punitive. If you're punitive, that doesn't help people want to come to school more.
No,
That
but there
doesn't partner with
does
families
have
better.
to be consequences.
Right.
And, coddling these kids or these parents,
Yeah.
is,
There you go.
is not helping them.
That's
So,
a good
yeah,
piece of feedback
what-
for the juvenile
what can
justice
be
system.
done?
You're right.
I'd really like, I'll send you that information from that. It's a whole PowerPoint presentation. It's really great. If you're
Interesting.
interested,
Yeah.
I'd be glad to.
The other thing just to keep in mind is that doesn't apply to any student who's absent for that amount of time. Again, our staff and our administration are working with families regularly. If there's students who have medical conditions or chronic medical conditions, they're working sometimes with Sarah on things. There's waivers they can get from the state if they're absent for legitimate reasons, or if there's a death in the family. Those are not counted against them. Those are pretty abnormal circumstances that are affecting attendance. So, Carly.
I also wanted to say, from a personal level, since my freshman year, we've seen them be stricter on it, and not in a way. I hear juvenile and it sounds really scary, but I know at Prescott High School, we just you have a limit of how many excused and unexcused, and you do I've had to talk personally with the committee and explain my absences, and I know a lot of other students have as well. So I think I've personally seen it with those numbers and things like that, have worked there. The consequences they currently have, I think, are really working on those numbers.
Which
and
are what? What are they?
So I know semesterly, I believe it's 5 unexcused and 9 excused. So that's excused is my mom calls and she says, oh, I have a doctor's appointment, something like that. And then you'll get on a no credit list, I believe. So you'll not get credit for that class until you have either explain the absences. So when I explained it to them, I just had one class where I was I'm just a student who has a job, so it was just purely because I was working, and they were really understanding about that, and so I got my credit for that class, and so they'll just talk to you about it. And then I know if you don't have that excuse, a lot of people will have to retake the class as well, and I don't know how it looks at
That's a
different
good
school
Yeah.
levels.
consequence.
The high
Yeah.
school is a little bit different because they do have credits that students have to earn.
Toward graduation, right?
Correct. So you talked about some of the kind of consequences. Do one of you guys want to talk about the incentives for attendance as well?
Yeah, if you have an 85% or higher and do not have those absences, you do not have to take the finals, which is like a really big help. And I know, like, personally, like I said, within my 4 years at Prescott High School, like, those absence rates have definitely
Yeah,
increased.
yeah, we're moving the
Yeah.
needle there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing some good things up at the high school to address that. The next piece of acceleration and readiness are special education inclusion percentages. So this is a moving target for us every year because it's based off of the state percentage of students who are in the classroom 80% or more of the day if they're in special education. So we know what that number has been or what that percentage has been from year to year, and we're working our best to kind of stay within that threshold. But again, we're keeping in mind that at the end of the day, we're doing what's best for each and every individual child based on the needs that they have. And we haven't seen any crazy trends that we're overqualifying or underqualifying students. We've been right in the same range as the state, but our focus here is we need to make sure we're meeting individual student needs in this category.
There's almost an incentive to
just gonna say that.
intentionally do something that may not be best for students, so you can get more points toward A through F. That
Not to-
deeply bothers me. So
That bothers me
we don't do
too.
that at all.
And another district in our area is doing that, where they're putting clearly a mild, moderate student into like an Algebra 2 class just to show inclusion. Gee whiz, that doesn't help when someone is so disruptive the other kids can't learn. Just so you get the brownie points.
Right. Yeah, we're not willing to
do
do that.
never do that.
We're not willing to do that.
Yeah.
Our first and foremost, it's students' needs. We're doing what's best for them. And it's worked out pretty well because we're right in the same range as the state as of now. The next category is subgroup improvement for both ELA and math, so you can get points here. What I will tell you is we're not eligible for a lot of points in these two categories. This is based off of subgroups from ethnicity to EL to poverty level. Special education is one of those. Each of those categories, you have to have 10 or more students in that category from year to year, and they have to be in that growth column. So Prescott is not an incredibly diverse community, so we don't qualify for a lot of points in there. And again, there's times where it looks like we will, but we don't have those 10 students 2 years in a row for that growth. So it's unfortunate that we can't maximize that amount of points, which is where you see in some of those, we don't maximize our acceleration and readiness. Sometimes it's because they don't have third grade or they don't have eighth grade, or we don't qualify for a lot of the components within subgroup improvement. The next category is bonus points. Again, these are points that are added on after the final percentage has been calculated. The first one is for special education. So you'll notice our special education students are counted 4 different times in A to F. And so this one is how a school overall enrollment of special education compares to the state. Again, it's a moving target. We have an idea, but all of those same things that we just talked about apply in this category as well. And then the last section of bonus points is for science proficiency. Again, this only counts for 5th grade, for 8th grade, and an 11th grade. So it's really unfortunate for our K-4 schools that they are not eligible for this. I will tell you, as a principal who was there before and after, it did make a difference. Had Taylor Hicks been eligible for this point, they would have had an A as well. They were 0.6 of a point away from an A this
Less
year.
than a single point.
Yeah, so this is the only place that the science assessment comes up. It's only eligible for bonus points. The rest of letter grades are based off of language arts and math.
That's curious to me that we've got essentially, 95% of a K through 8 grade looking at all this is from our scores on the ELA test and the math test they take. But the science test, which is, I think, in many ways just as important, counts for none of that, only comes in the form of potential bonus points.
Correct.
It's a funky system. If you're not picking that up, Kelsey can start from the beginning
It
again, I guess.
says you can
It's
earn up to
complicated.
5 additional bonus points. Is that together?
Together, yes.
Yeah,
So
right.
2.5 for the
Combined.
special
And 2.5.
education and 2.5 for science proficiency.
That's a lot of points.
So that was our K-8 model. I know. When we get to 9-12, some of these are the exact same, so it will not take as long. But You will see the percentages in the categories are a little bit different. So they still have proficiency. However, now that's worth 30%, where in K-8 it was worth 20. English language learners, again, is worth 10. Growth towards graduation is worth 20. Growth on assessments is worth 20% as well. Again, that's quite different than the K-8 model where that was worth 50%. And then a new category that's called college and career readiness. So proficiency is the same. So this is what the breakdown looked like for the high school. You can see here they got 19.15 points out of the 30 that were possible. Very similar number for growth. However, that was out of 20 points. So their growth numbers were great. And this was the first year, I believe, that they got growth points at the high school. So this is based off of the ACT Aspire that students take in 9th grade, and then the ACT that our 11th graders then take. So this is the first year that we had those two different scores to compare. So we're really happy with the fact that we showed so much growth from one test to the next in our students. It means the instruction that's happening at the high school is working. So nice job, ladies. EL, proficiency and growth, same qualifiers as what we saw for the K-8 model. Again, we've got some room to add some additional points in this category. Again, that's based off of the Azella assessment. And then you get down here into graduation rate, and I'll talk about that here in a second, and then CCRI. So total points that they earned was 84. They were well into that A range for the high school. This was a jump. They went from a B to an A. Clark, are they the only A in Yavapai County for high school?
Camp Verde High School
Camp
actually
Verde?
swung up this year as well. Many fewer kids.
Okay.
Yeah, first time they've ever been in A.
Yeah. So this is really exciting
One of
for
two
them.
in the entire
It's-
county, though.
Yeah, we're pretty proud of our high school.
It's pretty, getting into that A category, that's rarefied air, folks. This is, you can see, this is a difficult, funky, complex system.
Yeah.
A is stellar. The state calls B highly performing. If you got a B, you're a highly performing school. You're a highly performing district. You're nailing it. You're doing better than people expect, essentially.
Yep. So how graduation is calculated for high school, you look at this and this is confusing. I'll tell you, Adam and I have had lots of conversation about this data and what it means. The easiest way to describe this is you get points based off of how long students are taking to graduate from high school. So obviously, they want the majority of students to graduate within 4 years. However, there are occasions where students take 5, 6, or 7 years to complete their high school diploma. Now, where we see those 5, 6, or 7 is typically in dropout recovery or within some of our special education programs where they're working towards different criteria in order to graduate. And so they get different percentage points. But you can see, obviously, they're doing all the right things because they're maximizing their points for graduation. And then also down here, this graduation rate improvement is from year to year. This data is based off of 2022's graduating class. So when we look at it next year, it'll be based off of 23. It's a little bit of a lag so that they can collect this. What Mr. Neely has said is they're doing something different with this graduation number because what he calculates from our freshman class to our senior class is very different. They are calculating this in a very different way because it depends on when students enroll and withdraw from Prescott High School. So if you get nitty gritty, you can calculate that, but it is very complicated and they have to track enrollment dates and where they're going to school. Sometimes if they start at Prescott High School and graduate somewhere else, they're getting points in that capacity too, which again, it's hard to track for those high school folks, but they're doing the very best they can to do that. College and career readiness, this is high school only. These are all of the different areas that Mr. Neely has to collect data from. Every other score that we see on here is given to us from the state based off of assessment data or data that they have. Mr. Neely spends, I would say, 2 solid weeks, maybe 80 hours of his summer just putting this data together. You can see all of the different components that they have to track data for their students. This is not an easy process. And I will tell you, Mr. Neely is amazing. He's really learned how to maximize the points in this category. They were able to get 18.1 out of the 19 possible in this. So
When you say maximize the points, we're talking about making sure we don't miss something that
Correct.
would have given us points. We're certainly not, well, if we kind of fudge this way or whatever.
Right.
That's absolutely never the case, but making sure we don't miss out on things. And you can see with so many
So many.
different areas and so much data to collect, it would be easy to say, oh man, are you serious? I got to look at this for 362 kids and just say, maybe not this year, but
Right.
he uncovers every bit of data.
Yep.
Turns over every stone.
So like going through this list, if they went, so he encourages people like, or students to CLEP out, or do they, if they're not going through that route, then or they do the FAFSA. So you're saying we're missing out if we just don't do it, right?
It's just start, yeah,
So
and
you
then
have
we're
to
not
hit
tracking.
And
all
if we
these
don't
marks.
gather the data and
Yeah.
report it, both. If we've got, 80% of our kids that did the FAFSA and we just say, man, that's too hard to figure out who did that, we miss out on those points.
Yeah, so you make a good point. This is not just about collecting the data, it's putting these pieces
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
place so that we
Absolutely.
have data to
Yeah,
collect
some
for
of these
them.
things just happen, but
Yeah.
some of them, we encourage kids, hey, you gotta fill out that FAFSA, we got some
That's a
support for
laundry
you.
list.
Come on in,
Yep.
have you done it?
We have some action steps that we're gonna go through too?
Yes.
After this, okay.
Yeah.
Kelsey, can you tell me one thing I see on there? What's the Grand Canyon diploma?
You get
Great
one on a donkey.
question. Mr. Tenney, do you know that?
I do not, I'm not familiar with that, I'm familiar with IB, International
Yeah.
Baccalaureate.
Yeah, I knew that one.
Grand Canyon.
I've heard of the IB, I know about
Why don't I
that.
look it up while we're here, and I'll see if I can give you a 30-second answer.
Yeah, I mean, this is the
in the next
list
couple
that
minutes.
came from the business rules.
Okay.
Normally, Mr. Neely is here. I could ask him, but we'll find out.
Okay.
For the high school, their bonus points are a little bit different. They still have the special education, they have the science, because they have 11th graders who take AZ Sci, but they also get points for the amount of students who take the ACT Aspire. And again, we really want students to take that ACT Aspire because if they take that freshman year, that counts towards their growth when they get to be a junior. And lastly, the third model is our alternative school model. So this is our Genesis program that we have. This is our dropout recovery. What I will tell you is, yes, it looks a little different, very similar categories to what the high school has at 912. However, the percentages are a little bit different. I will tell you, I could not be more proud of that program for where they landed. This was the first letter grade that they had received. So I have to give Ms. Timchek, I got goosebumps because we weren't expecting this. We weren't expecting them to land with a B. Again, these are our students who just really struggled in a high school setting, and they're working to try and get a diploma, but they're not on site every day. Most of them are working remotely, and Ms. Timchek is definitely working some miracles with these kiddos. What you'll notice here is this proficiency is blank. They didn't have 10 or more 11th graders who qualified in that. Again, they have to have 10 or more students to get those points. Oh, sorry.
Kelsey, before we move on, can I ask, maybe Christina, you can help, or Kelsey, I think I know the answer as well, but there's not too many dropout prevention programs across the state,
No.
but there are a small number. And as we've looked, is B a typical grade for those? What's a more typical grade?
I would say throughout the state it varies, depending on location. Of course, how many students they have in their program
Sure,
will
sure.
also play into that grade and the number of students eligible, again, for those proficiency points. Depending on what points are eligible for that overall grade, I think there's a pretty wide span. So there's a cluster of A's, I'm sure, and B's. There's also, I'm sure, a lot of...
Have you seen A's? Have you seen DRP programs with A's?
I've seen maybe one or two.
Okay, yeah, I was going to
Not
say
a lot.
that's
Not
exceptionally
Not a
rare.
lot.
As we were looking and talking together,
Yes,
yeah,
we were talking together. I would say a lot of them have B's, C's. B's are actually not super common.
Right,
C's are pretty
right.
common. There are also some that obviously don't perform very well because this is a very challenging population to try to get to the finish
Sure.
line. We always try to do our best to do that, but of course there's some that will drop out. There's some that we're able to help along to that point. So there's also some that do not make that passing grade.
see, the long story short, I'm hearing you're being very kind and giving a lot of good information. C's and D's are very typical. That's what we were anticipating. So when we got this data back and said, wait a minute, we got a B, I'm like, Christina, can I give you a hug? She said, no, what's the matter with you? So that's kind of how that went. I found Grand Canyon diploma. It's a law. You can look it up if you want. ARS 15-792.03, my old eyes tell me. And it is enormously dense. However, it looks like early graduation diplomas essentially is the upshot.
Yep. So when it comes to Genesis, they maximize their amount of points for academic persistence. Their credits earned is probably their biggest growth area. Well, yes, it is. But you got on track to graduate and then graduation rate. Again, with only, 2 years that we've had this really running in this capacity, they're doing amazing things. So I'm very proud of the work that they've been doing. So just to come back, and I know we shared this prior, but to give you a little bit of context, again, PUSD percentage of proficient and highly proficient students for both ELA and math, we are outperforming our neighboring districts, we're outperforming the state in a lot of categories. I just want to remind you that this doesn't always equate to the actual letter grade. So you might see some neighboring districts who have letter grades for schools that are higher or lower. It's not just based off of this rate. But when we're just looking at proficiency, our students are doing pretty well. We've got room to grow, but when we compare to the state of Arizona, really we're outperforming most people in both of those categories. And even with all of that, you know, letter grades take into a lot of different context, but when you just look at that percent of proficient, we are in the top 17 and the top 19%. We still have places to grow, and I think that letter grade tells us exactly what we can focus on, and we have action steps of how we can maximize the points in each of those categories, but I don't want to lose perspective that we're doing really good things still.
And we're going to get better.
And we are going to get better. And how we're doing that is some of our action steps. So some of these things are things that you've heard before. First and foremost, this isn't something that we started within the last couple weeks. A lot of these are a couple year-long initiatives because we want to stop that swing in letter grades. We want to be able to accurately predict more of how students are going to do. That's why we put some of these components into place. So over the last 3 years, we've been talking a lot with teachers about truly aligning their instruction to the expectations of the Arizona state standards. That it sounds like it should be easy. It is not. It is incredibly complex. I wish the state gave us a little bit more direction of what those standards actually mean, but a lot of our work is trying to decipher what those mean, and that's what we've been spending our time doing. And then it's teachers really building intentional instruction to help students reach proficiency on those standards. And then how we're assessing that progress is through our common formative assessments. So after students are taught an essential standard, when teachers feel like they're ready, they give them a quick 5-question quiz and say, where are you at? Where are you at in your understanding? What do I need to do to help get you to proficiency within this standard? So for a typical, we're doing that 2nd through 12th grade, but for a typical subject, there's anywhere from 4 to 7 essential standards that are really being taught to proficiency in a quarter. And then at the end of a quarter, we have quarterly benchmark assessments. Those are given on the same essential standards that we've given those formative assessments on, but it's to do another check of, did they retain that information? Are there additional areas that maybe they forgot how to do a component and we need to go back and continue to reteach? So we want to make sure that they're maintaining those skills so that they can show proficiency on those standards.
Can you back up one?
Yep.
Sorry. Can I assume that we are updating our digs to match our CFAs?
Oh, great question. Yes. So with standards aligned instruction, that's what we did first, is we made sure to map out what are the essential standards we're teaching quarter 1, what is quarter 2, and then we matched our CFAs to those. Good question. Yeah. So, and that was a process. We've had some instructional guides that were pretty outdated, and we're pretty close to having updated new current ones for every subject area. Our next target place is focus on growth for all learners. And again, we can't predict where they're going to land compared to their peers in that cohort. However, what we've been doing is using that CFA data to create, reteach, and enrich opportunities for all of our kids. So if they need some reinforcement to get to proficiency, we're building instruction to match where they're at. if they've mastered that content and they're ready to move on, what are we doing to enrich those kids to deepen their understanding of that standard? We're also looking at lots of flexible groupings. I mean, for a long time, if a student was in an intervention, they were in intervention. That is not the case anymore. It is on a standard by standard, skill by skill basis. So we've got groups mixing and changing all the time. It's meeting each individual kid where they are. And that's what's happening in our WIN times or in our intervention times. So we've got groups of teachers working on different skills with different groups consistently. And that's where Fridays have been essential to making this happen, because that's when that is happening. So that is our biggest professional development opportunity for our staff, is really every Friday. And they're learning from each other, they're learning from the kids, they're learning from the resources that we have for them. But we've done a lot of work over the last couple of years to implement what's called a professional learning community, or a PLC. And it's not a meeting, it's not a thing, it's a way of thinking. So each of their meetings, we're asking teachers to focus on these 4 essential questions. Some meetings, they might just focus on one of these, because that's all they have time for. Some, they're focusing all 4, but the most important thing is, what do we want students to learn? They're using those unwrapped documents from BT that tell us, here's what this standard expects, and they're building that instruction together as a team to meet that need. What's been really cool is teachers are bouncing ideas off each other. How would you teach this? How would you teach this? What worked for you? Maybe I can steal some of that and use that in my classroom with my kids. So that's what's happening on our Friday afternoons. How will we know if students learned it? That's where our CFAs come in. And it's changing kind of our conversations and our instruction this year is to have those that are truly aligned to those essential standards. Then they're talking about, what's our reteach going to look like? What are we going to do if a student doesn't have it? And what are we going to do if a student does have it? So they're constantly cycling through these 4 questions to make the best possible instructional opportunities for our kids. We've also been working with Beyond Textbooks. We've heard that a lot. Again, the biggest opportunity that we've had with Beyond Textbooks is to use their instructional materials to align instruction to standards, to be truly standards aligned, to make sure that everything is kind of working in that same direction. They've been working with our teachers in August, our PD date, and then our PD date this week. We've got BT trainers who are coming to just work with our staff on, what are some strategies for that enrich and reteach? How are you using data to identify and target skills, and then to create those learning opportunities that will help fill in those gaps? So that's been a pretty great experience. I'm excited to see what this next one looks like on Friday, because now we have a lot more experience with these pieces, and teachers are really trying to fine-tune what that process looks like. So this is a great time for them to do that.
How many have you done, Kelsey? This
With
is the
BT?
first one? Yeah, BT assessment.
No. So we had, the very beginning of the year during pre-service, we had our BT kickoff, where it was just, here's how you access our materials, here's our philosophy, here's how you use them, here's how you do core instruction. So you plan for your whole group instruction. In August, on our first full PD date, we spent a half a day just going over reteach and enrich. So what does this look like? What's the philosophy behind it? And then this PD day that was coming up this week is all about, how do we refine those processes? Now that you've been working through it, what are your challenges? What's going well? How do we make that the best that we possibly can?
Yeah. Do we
So
have
those are
any
just
preliminary numbers that we kind of talk about, that we kind of did a little assessment?
From the
Is
first
that-
benchmark?
From the first benchmark?
Yeah.
Yes. First benchmark, first quarter, we saw some great things. I will tell you, it was a hard first quarter for teachers. There was a lot of new. This expectation of making sure that everything aligns to one specific point has been difficult, because some of them have been just working through a textbook where it's all laid out for you. Because we're in Arizona, our standards don't follow that. We have to be a lot more intentional than some other places. So it's a lot of work to make sure all of that aligns, but that benchmark was really, it was good. It was much better than I expected. I anticipate second quarter will be a better kind of check of where teachers are and where students are. We had some who are really working on a different pace of standards, who are teaching new standards in a new quarter. So really we were just trying to get them through practicing those skills, but what we saw from students was pretty great. If we can continue with that momentum, I think we're gonna see a big improvement in our state testing scores.
Great to see.
So, We're also focusing on math instruction. This continues to be an area that we're focusing on throughout the district. Not that we're not working on ELA, however, we knew we had some bigger gaps with math to fill in. So, new math curriculum for 5th through 8th grade. They started that this year on top of all these other changes. Those teachers are doing incredible things. And then right now we're in the middle of the adoption process, trying to determine which option is our best for both K-4 and 9 to 12 math. And we anticipate bringing a recommendation to the board sometime in the spring of this year. We also have a math stipend that the Ed Foundation has approved for our 6th through 8th grade is what that should look like, math teachers, because that is district-wide and statewide the biggest area of need. We need to work on those test scores. So what those teachers are doing is additional training on what are the strategies to best create mathematical thinkers. We want students who can problem solve, who can really have solid number sense, and who can tackle any math problem with confidence. Part of that is confidence, especially for 5th through 8th grade. And they're also doing peer observations where they can go in and learn what each other are doing. We also have 6th grade teachers going up to Mile High. We have middle school teachers going to Granite Mountain, also going to the high school to observe, so they're getting to learn from each other in a variety of ways as well. And then they're working with an instructional coach in addition. We're also focusing on attendance and engagement. We talked about this with chronic absenteeism, but that really starts at the school culture, or with school culture. And this is something that our principals do not let go of. They're constantly kind of checking where they're at with culture and doing everything they can to create a safe and positive environment where students want to come to school so that they can be as successful as possible. And then again, addressing that chronic absentee, getting students at school as much as possible. And those are the big things that we're doing. There's lots more, but those are the big initiatives.
The thing that I would like to say is that we as a board and as school district realized that we had some things we had to improve on. We had some test scores we didn't like.
Correct.
And we're doing something about it. And I think we're doing the right thing about it right now, and I think we need to let everybody know that we're doing something about it.
Yes,
We're not just
we are.
sitting in chairs. We're sitting in our classrooms and saying status quo is fine. We are working daily to make improvements, and I think you need to be congratulated, and all of our teachers too need to be congratulated on making steps for improvement.
They're working really hard.
Yep.
And
That's
the
what
one
I'm
thing I do
seeing.
want to say is this is not something that we just kind of put together now. This change that we're working towards to address some of these concerns, this has been 3 years in the making. This kind of systemic change about instruction and changing the expectations does not happen overnight. This is the first year that we're in a place where we're putting all of these pieces together for teachers, and they're really utilizing those. So I anticipate just continuing to refine that process, but having a new assessment program and process is going to be the biggest change that we have. And again, that took a couple years for us to get into place, but it's up and running. We're moving.
I think that's the thing that's most impressive to me is just
too.
understanding that this is not going to be an overnight
No.
fix. There isn't anything there's no magic bullet. What the magic bullet is having this planning and implementation on a timeline that works for everyone in the district so that we can make this progress.
And measurable goals.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But it's going to happen not overnight. It's not going to be 1 year to the next that we're
Yeah.
going to see things change rapidly
Yeah.
like that.
We're looking at long-term progress. I mean, this is a goal of, we want to continue and sustain that level of achievement. So we could have just said, okay, we'll just address this third grade cohort. That'll be great for a year,
Right.
but then what are we gonna do the next year? We're looking bigger picture than that. We
Yeah.
wanna make sure that it's year after year, kid after kid, that we're trying to get them the best
Yeah.
possible
So
as
that
we can.
consistency that comes with teaching every year to a system that we know
Correct.
or that we feel is going to work and that we're seeing some success with already.
Yep.
But it's going to take time to get across the entire district. So, yeah, thank you.
One part that's pretty glaring to me, Kelsey, is, in continuous improvement, you always want to encourage best practices, and that's what we kind of talked about here. And we have that internal to the district. Do we have anybody that's kind of been pinpointed that's not doing, and I'm not talking about an extra duty, to go out to help out Ashley or Teresa or Rachel, when it comes around to that time where you have to start compiling the information, and like Adam does, and making sure students take the ASVAB or CLEP out or whatever it might be, do we have anybody in the district that's just following that for them, and then just in their ear saying, have you done this? Have you done this? There's a nugget we can grab just for this in particular. That's not just, we know we have best practices through Beyond Textbooks. That's a great, but we see that's 30% of the pie. Do we have anything like that? Is that something you'd like to see? I mean, where could that be an action step?
So you're just talking about one person whose focus is on, are we attacking each of these components?
Maybe one person that's just very knowledgeable
Yeah.
in this particular area, because it's an important piece.
It is.
Just the whole picture of it obviously
Yeah.
is important to the community.
It's not simple.
It's not simple.
at
And
all.
I don't know if we could have just one person.
Yeah.
I know we're talking with principals more this year than we ever have around what are each of those components within the letter grade that we can really start to maximize points. But then we bring in our EL coordinator, who she's narrowed in on that set of data and is working with action steps there. We've got instructional coaches who are being trained in this whole process too, so they're starting to work with teachers on individual teacher components. I know at our middle schools and up, we have assistant principals who are actively involved in this. We also, really where all of this stems from and where we do the biggest amount of work is in our first summer days. So we call them our trilateral days. We throw as much data on the table as we can. We sort through it. We look at strengths. We look at growth areas. That's where all these action steps have come from. So we're keeping that on the radar throughout the year. All of that information creates our trilateral goals for the year. And then principals are working on those with their staff, whether it's leadership team or full staff throughout the year. So unfortunately, right now, it takes an entire team to make that happen because it is so complex. There's so many different variables within it.
I'll say, though, the person leading that team is standing right there. You're being modest, but she does a great job with that. Our district leadership team meetings that we have every week, there was a time where a lot of that was about, facilities and about what are you doing safety-wise and who's got an assembly coming up and whatnot. 80% plus, help me out, of our time is in those meetings is talking about instruction, sharing good ideas with each other, reminding people of things the way we talked about, et cetera. We are focused on this like nothing else.
That's excellent. Okay. Just asking. Great. All right, any other questions, comments?
We're good.
Girls, have you noticed anything going on, like with these CFAs we're talking about for assessments, the common formative assessments? Do you know what they look like in the classroom?
Don't really do it.
They're
They
not
might
seniors.
not see them because they're seniors
Yeah,
who are
that's what I
probably
thought,
in
yep.
dual enrollment classes or
Okay.
AP classes.
That's what I was assuming. but-
They have a different set of criteria that they're assessing towards. So, yeah, you guys probably don't see them.
Yeah, like college and career readiness, right?
Yes.
All right, good deal.
Part of the 20%.
All right, thanks, Kelsey. That was excellent. Item 7A, summary of current events. Mr. Tenney.
Okay, super, thank you. I'll try to be brief. I should have mentioned at the beginning, we want to excuse Mr. Moore. He's has a little procedure tomorrow that he has to drink something that makes him want to stay closer to a restroom than this forum would allow. So he asked if he could be excused. We said absolutely. So, and then you might have seen earlier, I was showing a text that I received to our board president and our board secretary. Mrs. Woods got with me and said that she just forgot and sent her apologies. And I asked if she wanted to participate remotely, and she said that was no, thank you. So I want to excuse her as well. Sorry about that. Let me do this first. One of the things that I wanted to share with you is that I'm working periodically with our marketing director. We've got a part-time person who helps us share with our community different things about PUSD and helps us recruit and in terms of enrollment, et cetera. And we have updated our information flyer about PUSD based on kind of a template that was shared with us is being used successfully in some other districts. And so we are going to print this on cardstock and have it in place of the rack cards that we've got at the Chamber of Commerce. They've asked for several. The hospital has asked for several as they recruit their doctors. The county has asked for several as they recruit their professionals. City has asked for several as they recruit their professionals. Association of Realtors is interested in having the information available as well. So we reached out to several of the major employers in town. They said, absolutely, send us some info. I've got on just regular paper, a draft of what it would look like. So if you want to take one and pass it down, you're welcome to have that. And these are being printed, I think, as we speak. So that's one of our current events. And then, was it, Andy, help me out, was it this last week that was Substitute Appreciation Week?
It's actually coming up.
Okay.
We took the
Good.
picture, though, and
Yes,
we're
well, we
preparing.
took the picture. So can you give us a little bit of info about that? Just the
Absolutely,
brief
yeah.
version?
So one of the things we really are trying to do is to make sure that our current substitutes are appreciated, and that we're also reaching out to kind of find new substitutes by reaching out to parents and community members to see if they have an interest. But so we put together kind of a handful of different appreciation ideas that we're going to share with our substitutes. And so that's coming up in just a short time, right around Thanksgiving.
Appreciate that. They're a big part of our success, of course, with 215 teachers, another 65 parapros, and then some other folks that need to be substituted for occasionally, bus drivers, et cetera. They're, as you can imagine, people are sometimes ill, or they've got something that was planned to be out of town, et cetera, and if we don't have great substitutes, we stop in our tracks until somebody gets back, and everything has to be adjusted. So we really, really appreciate it. There's a couple of folks in the room I know who help us with that regularly, and we love you. Thank you for everything you do. You're a big part of our success. All right. Another great thing that happened was this was last week, just last week. Desert Financial Credit Union has opened a branch in town here. They've had one in Prescott Valley for a while, and they were initially organized down in the valley by a number of teachers. What was the figure, Nancy? $78.75 was pooled together by teachers to start a credit union decades ago, and it's grown into something that's bigger than that. Big enough that they were in a position to donate $15,000 last week to our PUSD Education Foundation. That's being put directly toward our school improvement grants, or school enhancement grants, excuse me, and it's Mile High's turn this year in that sequence, and they have chosen to pool that with some money that's available from the district to get new furniture that's more conducive to cooperative learning and doesn't, look and feel 1970s-esque. So that's super cool, and it's neat to see kids and teachers, yes, Mrs. Tetro, respond to that, and that's, Mrs. Tetro got with her group and said, hey, we've got some funds available that we don't typically have. What's going to make an impact on student learning? And they said, hey, what about if it was easier to be here and learn? And so that's part of what we're doing. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. So super cool. I love our Education Foundation and love our partnership with a number of different organizations in town, but one of them is Desert Financial Credit Union. We appreciate them. Sorry. And then the last thing that we've got is, of course, it was Halloween recently. All of our little folks dressed up. It was fun. I got to really quickly go to Abaya Judd and then to Taylor Hicks, and then to be downtown for the Lincoln Parade as well. You can see some of our office staff dressed up as various, I believe not all barnyard animals. Animals are they're mostly mammals. We're looking at vertebrates. And you can't see it in great detail, but there's some more office staff. And in the very bottom picture, there's a picture of Brian dressed in a costume that made everybody feel uncomfortable. So there is that. There's the mullet. Here's the mullet that made people feel uncomfortable. Yeah.
How many years has that tradition gone?
The Lincoln Parade? Boy, I do not know. Decades.
Before I was
Okay. Kelsey did it when she was a student there, so it's been at least, 15 years then? Yeah. Mhm. Right.
Were you a mammal?
Very good. And I think that's it for me.
That's great. All right, item 7A2, governing board members. Sandy?
The only thing I have is I was able to attend basically the presentation that Kelsey just gave for Abaya Judd and for Mile High on a really rainy night. So really appreciate the parents who came out. I think it's really good that we did that immediately after those grades were released and gave a chance for parents to have some input on all the action items that are going on specifically for their schools. So just really appreciated all the work that was put in and all the parents who showed up to those sessions.
Great. Linda?
No, it's been a rough month.
You raised up my parade there, buddy.
Oh.
I was going to say that I went to that meeting with Andy as well, and I think I learned, each time I hear the presentation, I learn something more, which is awesome. And then the only other thing I have to contribute is working with the district, we run the Teacher's Closet, which I'm sure some of you have heard of, but what's happening now is that the community has been so generous with their donations that we used to only supply the really needed items in the classroom, and we're expanding. We're able to offer teachers other supplies that might not be considered core supplies, but they need them for their classroom, and they're not paying for them anymore, and that's pretty exciting to me. So it might be art supplies, it might be math manipulatives they don't have, things they don't have in the classroom that they would once again be using their own funds for, and we're able to give them more and more. It's a unique job to be able to give teachers things that they need and don't have to pay for. So it kind of coincides with being on this board too.
Absolutely. And we really, really appreciate your service, Carol's service, and the Education Foundation. That's really a draw for our teachers when they say, wait a minute, my last 2 districts I had to pay for my own stuff, or I got a $50 account to get Post-its and crayons and whatnot, and you give me anything I need that's reasonable? The answer is yes.
That's reasonable.
Yeah. Super cool. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, we used to have a science resource center so that every classroom could come in and have like a lending library for microscopes or things you don't use all the time. Do you have space for that kind of thing? To have like a resource center?
We had that when I was in Mesa as well.
They're really
We have more
helpful.
space than we used to, but in actual fact, we haven't addressed that issue, but it's food for thought.
So we, a couple years ago, realized that we had science materials in lots of different pockets in schools.
Yeah.
So it was a big initiative for all of our instructional coaches. They collected everything that wasn't currently being used and inventoried it. And it's actually, we have a science center at the high school. So there's an extra classroom that just has a ton of science supplies in it. When we adopted new science curriculum, teachers went through that and started taking things that they needed, but they also know, here's all the things that are still there.
And did they bring it back, or they
Not always. If it's something
squirrel it away for later?
Yeah, teachers got really intentional when we adopted new science curriculum. They went through and said, what are all of the materials that I know I'm going to need? And so they got rid of things that they knew they didn't need or that a different grade level needed, and they just really kept the things that aligned to the lessons within their curriculum. So we've done a lot of work
Didn't know
on
that.
that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's at the high school if you ever want to.
I get
sneak in there.
requests sometimes for consumables that they need in their science curriculum, some
Okay.
of it. And we do that, but I didn't know that was at the high school.
Yes,
That's
so if you want to
good
talk to Diane Ryan, it's in the room right next to her. She kind of helps us organize it. She's our science guru, but,
great.
yeah, and then we have a small budget for schools for those consumable pieces for science, because we know that some of them need to be replenished every year.
Okay, then that kind of parlays into how about a teacher resource center? So like for elementary school to go and make, I don't know, manipulatives, have a die cat, I don't know what they use now, but that may be something that Prescott might be interested in doing.
And we have die cuts at every elementary school, and I think Granite and Mile High have them as well. So those pieces are there. There are cutouts for manipulatives and things too. But they always can make more.
Anything else, Jane?
No, that's good.
So this last month, we had the NHS induction ceremony, and Carly did an amazing job as the president of everything that is NHS. I'm serious. She's aren't you the president of Diamond Institute Council? Very special.
like that.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. And she really did, and we didn't set up the fire sprinklers, right, with
Yeah,
all
I
the
was
smoke.
very
That
scared.
was very
Lots of
scary.
smoke.
But,
It
you know,
worked out.
I think the most impressive thing is, just the parents that were involved there too. I got to meet Carly's parents, but, just the parents that are around the community, just really sharp kids, just with that. And they don't lose sight of the fact that, of a sense of service. The academics is just a portion of one of the pillars. And it's really, that was something that I learned. And one thing that I brought up was just about being in the arena. And we talked about Theodore Roosevelt's Man in the Arena, and just encourage them to speak that, because those are our future leaders. And so I think it was an amazing ceremony. So wonderful to see everybody there. We had the Halloween parade. We also had the first grade Veterans Day performance at Lincoln. I know there's a lot of Veterans Day activities, and just much appreciative. Just an amazing deal. I know I got some feedback from a community member that had a grandfather that came in and just couldn't stop weeping when their grandchild was speaking, and they were a Navy vet. So pretty amazing. We're coming. Yeah, it's amazing.
And none of that, just for context, none of that shows up in these letter grades.
Correct.
They're all awesome things going on at our
This
schools,
is true.
and that system totally misses much of what makes our schools great. Go ahead.
Absolutely. We're coming up on our 70th day of school, so I know there's a lot of celebration for that. People, our students will be dressing in 70s attire, so it should be pretty fun.
Oh, no.
I don't want to steal any of the thunder, but I'm just love watching the record of the flag football team. First year, 12-0. All the state games are going to be played here in Prescott, so it's a pretty phenomenal deal. So I think everybody should get out there and cheer on those our Lady Badgers, because they're doing an amazing job. So, and the football team obviously won the region, so which is even better. You don't have to wear a jersey this year.
That is, yeah. I failed to make a bet in advance, however, so nobody's wearing our jersey. I'm feeling kind of bad about that.
Gotcha. Well, good deal. All right. Well, we'll move on to Carly. You got some. What do you got?
I have some of the sports ones
All
as
right.
well. Girls volleyball is 12-5. They're ranked 14th in our division, and they play their first state game tomorrow. It says here that it's at PHS, but I'm pretty sure it was moved somewhere in the valley. So unfortunately, I don't think we can go. But I know a lot of great volleyball players, and I know they're really excited. Swim has their state this weekend as well, and mountain biking just finished. They finished 3rd in state. And 4 of their athletes placed top, or 4 of them placed top 4 in state. Boys golf, their entire team qualified for state, and they won their section. And girls golf also won their section.
Yeah. What did you get?
I did get 4.
Nice.
So yeah. Additionally, we had Special Olympics week at the high school. There was a lot of events this week. It was just last week. We don't have totals yet because we don't have all the money from all of the PUSD schools, but we're looking at about $3,000. And those different funds go towards things like transportation and jerseys, because what is not highlighted is that a lot of the Special Olympics students at Prescott High School are from like a lot of farther around distances, so they have to like travel really far or don't have the same opportunity as someone who just lives down the road. And so we got to like play bocce ball on the field with them. It was one of our events. We had a Special Olympics dance on Saturday, which was my first silent disco, which is you get to like take off the headphones. And we had different students from the ages 5 to people from YEI who were in their 80s with all different disabilities. And I think if it showcased me anything or my student council, it would be just how inclusion really does make a difference in our lives. And it's really easy to say, but it's really hard to do. And I do hope that that's an active goal that every student encourages throughout the rest of the year. Trunk or treat was also during this week, which obviously encourages all the PUSD students, which had great turnout, and the game was after, and we did win. And upcoming is Teacher Appreciation Week. This is student council led, and we wanted to do it in light of Thanksgiving because we are really grateful for the teachers at Prescott. So hopefully we'll have some good events for that as well.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. Vanessa, did your brother participate by any chance?
He did not.
Oh, not this
Yeah.
year. I got you. All right.
Cause he's 10 years old, but he's like really tiny, so
Oh.
he's
Not yet.
Yeah.
That's great.
Other sports events, the badminton team, they finished their season last week in the state semifinals. They finished 15-2, and were 3rd in state. Cross country also finished their season on Saturday, and both teams are qualifying for state championships. The girls finished 16 of 22 teams, and the boys finished 17 out of 33 teams. Like Mr. Goligoski said, the Lady Flag football is finishing their regular season, or finished their regular season yesterday. They are undefeated, 12-0. and they are ranked number 1 in the 4A. Their first round is the 13th of this month here in Prescott. The quarterfinals are the 16th here in Prescott as well. Semifinals on the 20th and state championships on the 23rd. And the football team also finished their regular season on Friday night. They are 8-1 right now and are ranked number 7 in the 4A. I think it was last Friday where they were 35-28 with Coconino, winning the 4A Grand Canyon Regional title, which is amazing. Also, the Dignity Health and the Yavapai College Allied Health are doing their Career Exploration Day on the 6th of December, which I think is amazing. Also, they're adding a dental assisting program, which I am super excited about. I know I have family members, relatives at PHS that are currently really interested in dental assisting. So I'm grateful for them, and I know they're really grateful for this amazing opportunity. Last year, around this time as well, I also attended this Explorational Day, which is how I was able to join my applied college classes that I'm currently taking right now, which I think is an amazing opportunity for me and the rest of PHS. Tomorrow, Abayajat is having their Glow Run fundraiser, which I know my brother is participating in,
Nice.
which is really exciting.
That's cool.
And yeah, I think I speak for everyone here when I say that as a community, we are really grateful for these amazing opportunities and these successful badges.
That's great. And I know Dr. Mangum's excited about hiring dental aides pretty soon. So, Up here. Great. All right, we will move on to community comments. Any community comments shared with anybody? Yeah.
Pardon me. I had a request from a community member who wanted to know about all the billboards and everything, maybe even these rack cards, but the banners and why we're spending taxpayer money on those things and then taking down the letter grades and putting new skin on, with, he called it celebrity mugshots or something. I don't remember exactly, but he wanted to know why.
Great question. Would you like me to address that with everybody here now?
do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. First of all, no taxpayer dollars were used for that. We've been using civic rental funds, so when we rent out a building, somebody pays for that. That goes into a fund, and that's what we use to build the billboards. The idea of the billboards and the banners and rack cards and everything is to give people information about our district, so particularly when people move into town, but if they're moving from a charter school to, say, ninth grade where their charter school caps out at 8th grade, or if they're looking at different educational options. Arizona's an open enrollment state, as you know. If they choose PUSD, that brings substantial funding to us that helps us increase programs and lower class sizes and increase funding for staff as well. So if we have a billboard and one family with 3 kids sees it, that brings in $21,000 the next year, and the next year, and the next year. So if we were using taxpayer dollars for that, which again we're not, it would pay for itself quite readily.
And I didn't
Printing
know
this
how to
costs us
answer.
about $45. So that's, if a single family ever sees that and it becomes part of their decision to come to us, again, money very well spent. So like all organizations, we advertise the good things that we're doing to assist our organization in the long run. And the billboards, as you have noted, are made to be changed out about every year. Last year, we had the single letter A that everybody got excited about, and we mentioned at the time, it's kind of a confusing, funky system, but as long as people are fixated on A's, we'll put an A there for a while. We did that. This year, we're a B, which again is highly performing, but we didn't want to continue to advertise an A on bulletin boards when we've got a couple of schools that are that way, and the district is not overall, so we'd had a plan to change that out after a year. It had been a year, and we said, how else can we continue to focus on the results that we produce from our schools? So the A is part of, it's one symbol of the results we produce from our schools, but our graduates who have made good, for instance, the 4 on the billboard are the most recent Supreme Court Justice of the Arizona Supreme Court, or Chief Justice, excuse me, of the Arizona Supreme Court, our local police chief, another PHS graduate, the Attorney General of Arizona, PHS graduate, and recent instructor at West Point, who's a distinguished veteran of the military, who happens to be the president of our governing board. We're the 4 folks that we chose to kind of be representative of what PUSD students go on to do. So we figured it's really good marketing in the community in terms of building goodwill and showing people, hey, I heard, kind of crazy things about a school in North Carolina, but they can see very readily. Well, it seems to be different here in town when we advertise that way. And again, economically, if we were paying taxpayer dollars, it's very likely to pay off, but that's not what we're doing. It's a good question.
I would like to say I'm quite inspired every time I put past Mr. Goligoski's face, which is like 4 different times a day.
They call it baby Goligoski face, right? I mean, so that was 17 years ago. Let's be clear, all right?
I couldn't even tell.
Oh, thanks. That's why you're the president of everything. I know.
We, of course, got with each of those alumni of PHS to ask, hey, this is what we're planning, and are you willing to participate? And all 4 of them were kind and said, absolutely, and here's my photo that you can use. So we appreciated those folks who are real high profile. There are so many great alumni, right? We've got 26,000 alumni overall. Great moms, dads, engineers, doctors, attorneys, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are 4 folks who would be recognizable to many people in our community right away. So we thought, yeah, we'll put those up there to begin with.
Very honored.
And I've had so many positive comments. I'm assuming this is a positive comment as well, and so that makes probably number 18 in the last couple of weeks.
Good. All right. Thanks. I'll move on to item 8A, consent agenda. Is there any items anybody wants to pull or have questions about? All right, I'd like to pull item 8A2, just to go over the donations. We had 4 this month. Perry Arts LLC donated $1,000 to PHS Drama. Frontier Rotary donated $1,000 to Farm to School. American Lifestyle Furniture donated $343.68. And then Sprouts Communities Foundation donated $10,000 for PHS Farm to School. Amazing.
Great examples of our community partners, people who recognize that we're funded essentially at the bottom of the nation and want to do something about it.
Couldn't agree more. That's great. All right, so I'll consider a motion. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Motion is seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
None opposed. Consent agenda passes. Move on to item 8B, study and voting sessions. Do we have any call the public sheets? Great. Moving on to item 8B1, review the proposed changes for the ASBA Policy Advisory 801 to 807, Volume 36, Number 5, from September 2024. Andy?
Yeah, so I thought I'd just quickly review and remind everyone that we as a district and the governing board are members of the Arizona School Board Association, and one of the things they provide to us is some guidance on policies, and when laws change, they provide suggestions to us, and we're going to go over some of those right now. I presented these at the last month's board meeting, and I haven't heard any questions, but I'll quickly review them again if anyone has any questions for me about them. None of them are significant changes to the policies, but most of them, again, reflect legal changes or legislative changes or policies that have changed either at the state level or the federal level. There's one change that just kind of broadens the powers of the individual school boards on when they can do their self-evaluation. There's one about making sure that there is proper documentation when it comes to purchasing procedures, and again, that is a process that we've already been following, so it's not really in practice a change. There's some changes to the onboarding process, that what we're asking of any new employees to kind of complete and make sure that they are verifying that they have not committed certain crimes, and there's been recent laws requiring certain things to be documented, and we've already been doing that. There's some changes relating to what we require of our certified staff when it comes to curriculum development, and that's a change that's not in legislation anymore, so there's no need for the policy, and there's actually no need as well because we never have any issues getting staff to participate in those. There was a change to our policy relating to animals in schools, mainly relating to some safety-related issues, and that's a policy that we actually made some adjustments and made our own policy, and so you'll see that kind of pulled out separately. And then there's a change to some regulations relating to how we manage students with seizure plans and how we make sure that that's covered and we have all our staff trained. So any questions on any of those changes?
Does animals in school include like hamsters, those kind of things?
Like pet
Yeah.
class
yeah.
pets? It does, yes, that's
Okay.
exactly what it's kind of referring to. So,
Had a possum once in my classroom.
No kidding. That's pretty cool.
It was really cool. Green grapes, they like green grapes.
I'll write that down. Possum is cool. That's,
Till they bite.
oh, okay. All right.
Any questions? Any other comments? All right, I'll take a motion to approve the proposed changes in ASBA Policy Advisory 801 to 807, Volume 36, Number 5, from September 24.
I'll make that motion.
Motion, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion seconded, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Item 8B2, the board will discuss, consider, and give direction on voting on one bylaw change proposal from the Arizona School Boards Association. This bylaw proposal by the ASBA Board of Directors must be approved by 2/3 of the ASBA board member boards to be effective. After discussion, the board will vote to give direction to Sarah Torres, Administrative Assistant to the board, to vote in the manner the board has approved. Andy?
yeah, so as I just mentioned, we being members of the Arizona School Board Association, again, we being the ones that get to kind of make the decisions or have a vote in the decisions when it comes to these bylaws. They're making suggestions, as I scan through them all. The theme is trying to make it their process more transparent and open. A lot of the changes that are suggested in this, again, are not school board policy related at all. These are bylaws for how their board of directors or how their organization operates. But a lot of them kind of relate around that theme. Some of them, some of the changes wouldn't actually apply to anything that would affect us. One of the early ones that is discussed here is there's different types of members, and we being an active member, and then they make a change to, for example, an organization affiliate that, again, wouldn't apply to us. But this is something that we, or you as a board, can review. If there's something that you want to discuss around it, you can. This is something that eventually, if you have suggestions, you can provide to Sarah, and then she provides to the ASBA organization. So, any questions if you've had a chance to review it?
Any direction from anybody?
It's pretty run-of-the-mill. Both Andy and I went through it
Yeah.
fairly carefully, and it's all, you can see, you've got the red line version attached to your packet and whatnot. There's nothing super substantive. I don't think anything that would impact our district in any meaningful
I did not see
way.
anything.
Okay. So, no vote, we just need to give direction? Is that where we're at? Yeah. I'm hearing none. All right. Good job, Sarah.
So we don't have, as a board, we don't have any issues with it. And
Okay.
You have to go onto their website, and there's a portal, and vote that you are all okay with these bylaw changes.
Okay.
I think the motion, though, does state that we will vote to give
Yeah.
direction.
Probably
We
ought to.
do have to.
Probably ought to.
All right. So the motion would be to,
accept the bylaw changes as presented.
okay, I'll say that. I'll take a motion to accept the ASBA bylaw changes as presented.
So moved.
Motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Motion second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Item B, 8B3, consider approving the partner agency memorandum of understanding between United Way of Yavapai County and Prescott Unified School District.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, you didn't even
Yeah,
say
Mr.
my name?
Jenny.
Okay, appreciate that. I probably should have. Wait, I'm trying to get us to the finish line as quick as I can. We get donations from a variety of organizations, and usually they come with a memorandum of understanding in terms of how it'll be used. We have not, to my knowledge, in recent years at least, received direct donations from the United Way. They donate to lots of different groups that partner with us, Big Brothers Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of organizations that work with our same kids. So we work in tandem with them, but I can't remember the last time they donated directly to us. Our farm to school coordinator, Victoria Ellis, made an application to them for a donation toward the food forest at the high school. She's been, as you know, getting donations and grants from a number of different areas. And the United Way did something that's unusual in my experience, is to ask that our board actually vote on the memorandum of understanding that comes with it. So you've got it before you. It's pretty standard, just saying that we'll accept the money and we'll use it as has been described to them in the grant process.
Yeah. Obviously, hearing no conflict of interest at all, we don't have anything.
Yeah. And anytime, I'll clarify as well, anytime there's an intergovernmental agreement,
Yeah.
we always come to the board for votes on that. With MOUs, we don't always, or we put it in the consent agenda so you can vote on this. This was something they specifically asked for the board to sign off on in a public vote, and I think it's a great way to acknowledge their donation and support the request that they've made.
That's great. Yeah. Great organization. All right. I'll take a motion to approve the partner agency memorandum of understanding between the United Way of Yavapai County and Prescott Unified School District.
I'll make that motion.
Motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Motion seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Abstain.
On what grounds? On
Do I have
abstention.
to state?
We can ask
On an
them.
abstention, you do. Yeah.
People have requested not to support United Way.
All right, moving on to 8C, information discussion items. 8C1, obviously Mr. Moore is not here. He prepared the school board summary budget for report. Is there, or for our review, anybody have anything, questions on it?
I think you wanted one of us to say as presented, so it feels official. Yeah.
That's true. Thank you. All right, I'll move on to 8C2, request for future agenda items. Anybody? All right, hearing none. 8C3, meeting dates, regular voting and study session, December 3rd. We're back on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. right here. We have Veterans Day on Monday, and then Thanksgiving break, 27th through the 29th. We're adjourned.